So you're meeting with your client for the first time. What do you ask them? Here's a list of several topics and several questions to ask your client in order to help represent them to your best ability. A lot of these questions will help in negotiations with the prosecutor and resolving the case and figuring out what is going to be in the best interest of your client. So first and generally, of course, you want their phone number and their address, as well as any permission to speak with anyone. They might have some family members that you'd like to get in contact with if you can't get a hold of them, so alternative phone numbers or alternative addresses. Their employment status, their schooling. Sometimes it's important to ask about their upbringing in school, whether they had any literacy issues, if they had any special classes. That could also help. Of course, any prior convictions. That's a question that you'll definitely want to go into detail with your client. Sometimes clients can get confused on whether certain things mean a conviction or whether certain things qualify for something in regards to prior convictions or prior cases. Have they ever been convicted of a crime before? Was it a felony? Was it a misdemeanor? Sometimes asking, have you ever been arrested before, will help jog their memory and you can talk out exactly what is what. Whether they pled guilty to a crime is another helpful tool. You'll be able to discern whether it was a suspended imposition of sentence, which means there's a no conviction, or an actual conviction, which is suspended execution of sentence. Also, you'd like to know where were those cases from? Was it from St. Louis County, another jurisdiction, out of state? That will help get a bit of a background information as to what their criminal history looks like, if they have any. Also, probation of any kind, that's going to be extremely important to know. Whether somebody is currently on probation when you receive the case or not is some information to be aware of, or whether they have just finished probation or not. If so, what's their probation officer's phone number and how can you get in contact with them? Prior military service is a great question to ask. I believe in some other segments you'll learn a little bit about alternative courts. There is something called a veterans court. So whether your client has some kind of past military service, that's an important question to know. Next is immigration status. A conviction of any kind or a plea of any kind could ultimately affect someone's immigration status or have some consequences in immigration court. So it's extremely important to know what their status is. Next is to ask about any mental health diagnosis, so any mental health issues. You could ask your client, have they ever gone to the doctors or been to the hospital for some kind of mental health issue? At times it might be helpful to give examples like, bipolar or schizophrenia or any of those kinds of questions, and that could help them answer your question in regards to mental health diagnosis. If your client lets you know that in fact they have had a doctor diagnose them with some type of mental health illness, then it's extremely important to ask them what if and where were those actual diagnoses from, which doctor's office, which hospital that was at. That could help you learn a little bit about your client's past, the mental health issues, if they're currently still seeking treatment, where they're seeking treatment for that mental health, if they're on medications, what medications are they taking. So that could help a little bit in regards to their mental health status and understanding where they're coming from to that extent. Now, medications a client's taking, going off of any kind of mental health issues, it would be important to know whether they're taking medications for that illness or simply if they are taking any type of other medications for any other health reasons that would affect their ability to participate in their case. Another question you would like to ask your client is whether they have health insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, any of those type of situations. That would be helpful, hopefully, in the long run when you're negotiating to see if their healthcare provider can assist in any type of treatment for this drug possession case or this mental health issue. Another question on drug possession cases would to ask if they have any past or current addictions. Now, just because they're charged with a drug possession case doesn't necessarily mean that they have an addiction to them. So it would be really important to ask, if so, to talk a little bit freely about what they've struggled with, or was it just a one-time scenario type of case. And if they had had some type of addiction struggles in their past, to ask them exactly what kind of struggles were they going through, had they received any treatment for that, and then if so, where. Now this is an example of what we call a first client interview information sheet. It's very generalized, and we'll have a couple of other examples for you to take a look at. But this helps when you're sitting down with your client for the first time and you'd like to ask them some questions. You want to make sure that you remember everything clearly, and some things to check off on the list. So this is a very generalized example. It's not bullet by bullet. It kind of helps once you've kind of had enough clients to, that you know what questions to ask, and so this is a general summary. So at the top you see the immigration status, if not, what their status is, permission to speak to anybody. It'd be helpful to grab phone numbers there. Priors, probation, any other charges, that's where you can write down whatever they report to you. Your mental health section, so diagnosis of conditions like we talked about earlier, health care providers. I also like to go into health or mental health, as well as any addictions, and I'll put that section there. Bond reduction information, that's in case you need any other information about, you know, how many kids do they have, where do they live, where do they work, what are their family members, are they from the area, how long have they been in the area, do they have any extracurricular activities, are they involved in a family, church group, things of that sort to help with a bond reduction. Military service, yes or no. Other notes that when you're talking about your case with your client, maybe some facts of the case they wanted to reveal to you. And then at the bottom is the literacy, like we mentioned earlier, whether your client has had any type of issues growing up in school or not, whether they had any after high school education, GEDs, certifications, anything of that sort to help get a better idea of who your client is as a person. So this is another checklist, and I do recommend maybe creating your own or gathering information from each one and blending it. But this is another one where it's more of a check-off list, so you can go down the line. So in addition to the range of punishment, it's important to go over any type of lesser included offenses. So for instance, a drug possession case, a felony, a lesser included offense could be a misdemeanor, or for a stealing felony, a lesser included could be another misdemeanor. So there's different types of outcomes that could be included in the case that is presented to your client at that moment. This is another example of a first client interview intake sheet or information sheet. This one's 2 pages, and as you can see, it's formatted differently from the other two. It has more lines and divided into different sections. So there is a section on this intake sheet on page 2 that offers an opportunity for you to take notes about the actual case itself, what the discovery would look like, what is your client telling you, what happened at that time they were arrested, things of that sort. But as you can see, there's a common thread between all of these information sheets where you see healthcare providers, military service, previous convictions or probation, family, jobs, information about them. This also includes a section for any witness to contact. So again, if they say, hey, so-and-so was there at the time, you can reach out to them. That's something that would be important to note that you could provide there as well. This is another format as well. This one's 2 pages, but instead of the one-page intake sheet. This has a section for health, for bond information, as well as any other pending cases. If your client has any other cases anywhere else, you can write that down in the pending charges, or any other locations, prior convictions, can set up juvenile, misdemeanor, felonies, what state as well. So here's different types of formats, whichever works best for your note-taking. Again, another format here that you see, there is client information sheet, client statement or state's evidence that you could go through with your client at that point in time Your first client interview, you can talk about whatever you like. So if you would like to talk about the actual facts of the case, if you have discovery by that point, that is something that is offered in this format to take notes on what the discovery would show or what your client is letting you know about the facts of the case. Here's another one. This is a check-off sheet more so. This has the questions laid out. That could help you too whenever you're having a conversation with your first client. The first one that you saw was very generic basis. Might forget some things that are important to ask. So this is more detailed, has the question written out for you so that way you can remember to follow along, check off yes or no. Doesn't provide you much space to write, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Now that you had your first client interview intake form with you, what are some things that you need to tell your client about their case? Obviously, confidentiality is extremely important. We want to remind them that everything is confidential that they tell you, and that you are not working with a prosecutor and you will not tell the prosecutor any information unless they give you permission to do so. Your contact information, their next court dates. It's very important to help to remind them when their next court date is. So a business card with their next court date is always very useful and very beneficial for them. And what to expect next. At your first initial interview, depending on where the case was assigned an associate or circuit court, if you're in associate court, what to expect next, preliminary hearings, grand juries, court dates of that sort. If you're in circuit court, what to expect at your next court dates, where the judges, the prosecutor, discovery issues, that type of thing. Also, you'd like to remind them that once you receive any type of discovery, that they'll receive discovery and that you guys could review it together. As well as negotiations, that to expect that you will be working on their behalf to get the best outcome possible on their case. Now, let's talk about reviewing discovery, what that looks like. Specifically in drug possession cases. So you will be receiving police reports or any type of discovery or any type of evidence the state's going to be using against your client. Once you receive that, what do you do with it? Now, here are some issues you want to be looking out for. So you're reading through the police report. What are some things that you'd like to take note of in the police report? Well, first of all, is the police report complete? Do you have every single report possible that the state can provide over to you? A lot of police reports include supplemental reports. So for instance, if another officer shows up and they write a second police report, but based on the same case, that would be a supplemental police report that you would like to have a copy of as well. So you want to make sure you have all of the reports available to you in this case. Some other discovery items that you would like to request or you would like to make sure that you have asked for is dash cam footage. A lot of police vehicles have camera footage on their dash of their cars, in audio and video. So you'd like to know if that was available at the time. Body cam footage, a lot of police departments have on a camera that is equipped with audio and video as well. So I'd like to know if that was available at the time. Some surveillance footage of the scene surrounding the area. You'd be surprised on how many buildings have their own surveillance footage, just pointing at the street or pointing at the sidewalk, or even a neighbor's house might have their own video surveillance footage. So if that's available, if this happened at a restaurant or at a mall parking lot or something like that, you'd like to let the prosecutor know, hey, do you have that video surveillance footage? Have the officers checked for that? Drug lab report. So on drug possession cases, they're going to send off the actual substance that was recovered at the scene of the crime at the time. And then that substance is going to head off to the lab for testing to see if it tested positive for a narcotic. They write a report and then they send it back to the prosecutor's office. So it's extremely important that you have that lab result to show whether or not that is a narcotic or not that's involved in your case. As well as 911 calls. So for instance, if there was somebody that said that they saw something suspicious and they called 911, well, if that is related to your case, you would definitely like a copy of that. Continuing with some discovery issues on drug possession cases, some client statements are something that you would definitely want to be taking a note of. So if the police report has any statements made by your clients, you definitely want to be paying attention to that. If there's any audio and video footage of your client making a statement, let's say at a police station later on, you'd like a copy of that. Some police reports might refer to an audio or video interview of your client, but that would not come along in the discovery initially. So you'd like to make sure that that prosecutor is providing you over with that audio and video of your client's statements. While you're looking at the discovery, some things to take note of is maybe some constitutional violations. Was there an illegal search and seizure? Was there an issue with probable cause? Was there no reasonable suspicion to stop your client? A lot of times these drug possession cases are a traffic violation or somebody walking down the street. So did that officer have enough means or reasonable belief to stop that individual, to even approach them? So there's some constitutional issues on that, as well as statements made, were those statements made in violation of their constitutional rights. Now, when we're looking at drug possession cases, sometimes those drug possession cases are involving some type of prescription pill, some type of opioid. Now, if your client is prescribed that medication, that could be used as an affirmative defense. So when you're discussing the discovery with your client, that's something that you'd like to ask them. Remember, we talked about medications, because that could be something where, hey, they had a prescription for this opioid or this medication, they didn't have it on with them, so that's an affirmative defense. Names of any other individuals that were present at the time is something that you definitely want to be taking a look at in the discovery packet in the police report. Did the police report mention any other individuals that were with your client at the time of the arrest? If so, can you contact them? Can you ask them questions? Is their testimony going to be aligned with the police report or vary? And also, with those other individuals being present at that location where your client was arrested, were there any illegal narcotics found on anybody else at the time? If there was more than one person being arrested for narcotics, well, that might be something that you could take a look at to see whether that narcotic was actually your client's or not, or whether you could argue that. Now, reviewing discovery for felony stealing cases. We just talked about what reviewing discovery looks like on a drug possession case. Now let's talk about what it looks like when you have a felony stealing case, and what are some things to take note of during that discovery. Now again, you definitely want to make sure that you have all of the police reports. On stealing cases, there's tends to be more supplemental reports because more officers are involved. Maybe they took a witness statement later, maybe they talked to the victim later. So it's very important to request any supplemental reports or take a second look at that. 911 calls again, surveillance footage. I can't stress enough how surprised you'd be if you asked for surveillance footage of the area, how likely you might be able to find something that was being surveilled at that time. This is really important. The actual amount of the items that were taken, actually over $750. So for a felony stealing case, the amount has to be at least $750 or more. So when you're looking at a discovery, when you're looking through the police reports, does the amount that they're claiming was stolen actually meet $750? Because then otherwise you're looking at a misdemeanor and not a felony stealing. So sometimes it can get overwhelming with how many police reports and what they claim to be stolen, but if you steal 80 t-shirts and it still doesn't meet the $750 requirement, well, now you're not looking at an actual felony. So that's important to take note of. Also, an itemized list of items. So for instance, let's say your client is accused of stealing items from a Walmart, but the Walmart hasn't provided you exactly what was stolen. They just say some t-shirts and some hats. Well, then how do you know for sure that it's met the $750 requirement for felony? So getting that itemized list of the items that were stolen is going to be crucial and very beneficial for you and your client in order for the state to prove their case. And again, any other names of individuals in relation to the offense. Was it somebody else that was with him at the time that you would like to be able to call and find more information about? Now, a lot of the times you'll be seeing on these felony stealing cases that restitution is asked for. And it's extremely important to take a second look at that police report and see if the items were actually left or that were actually taken away from the victim or that individual. Because sometimes they'll ask for restitution, however, your client was stopped and the items were returned. So then essentially there's no restitution to be given because there was no items taken away. So it's extremely important to know whether or not that is something that actually happened. Otherwise, the state's going to be asking for your client to pay $1,000 when they really didn't take any $1,000 worth of anything. Another question to ask when you're reviewing discovery is whether the victim had an insurance policy. So if a major store like a Walmart or Home Depot or such have insurance policy for when items have been stolen from their location, then you'd like to know that, and you'd like to know whether they had to pay a deductible for that claim. Because if they only pay the deductible, then your client's only on the hook for what they had to go out of pocket in. Another important question to ask is the market value of the items that your client's allegedly to have stolen. So that's important because when you're looking at that $750 minimum to meet that felony requirement, if the market value of at the time does not meet $750, well then now they cannot charge your client with a felony stealing. Items returned, talked a little bit about that. If the items are returned or if they stopped an individual for actually leaving the premises, then there's no restitution. Any constitutional violations, we discussed that earlier too. Again, any statements made, any lack of probable cause, any issues with suppression or illegal search and seizures, those are things that you'd like to be taking a look at while you're going through the discovery as well. Client statements, constitutional violations for those, as well as you wanting a copy of that audio and video of your client's actual statements. In reviewing discovery, some police reports might reference a client conversation, police having a conversation with your client, or recording it after giving them Miranda rights. So you want to make sure that you have an audio and video recording of that. Might not come in initially with your initial discovery, so that's why it's important to double check and make sure that you have a copy of that. Now, after you reviewed the discovery and you've spoken with your client, now it becomes an opportunity to negotiate with the prosecutor. How do you get the best outcome from the initial plea offer? Here are some things to keep in mind. So initially, the prosecutor will provide to you a plea offer, essentially what the state is willing to do in exchange for your client to plead guilty. Now, that's going to be their initial offer. Does not mean that it has to stay that way. Here are some things to keep in mind to negotiate with the prosecutor and talk to the prosecutor to get the best outcome for your client. Reduction of charges. That is something to keep in mind. Can you reduce the charge from the felony to the misdemeanor? The stealing felony, which is the $750 and more, down to a misdemeanor stealing. Sometimes that can include with the stealing cases, maybe paying some restitution up front and hopes to, in exchange, reduce it down to a misdemeanor. For instance, let's say the amount was that $750 that was allegedly stolen. If your client comes in with a check for $750 to pay towards restitution, would the state be willing to amend the charges to a misdemeanor instead of having that felony conviction or that felony plea on your client's record? Conditions of probation, sometimes you can get creative with that. So let's say your offer is probation, where it's 3 years of probation without a conviction. Here's some conditions of probation. So sometimes you can get creative with that. Maybe your client needs some type of drug treatment that they're willing to do. Or maybe they can do some community service hours, or maybe it's a restitution option for probation. So you can get kind of creative in that sense. I've even seen doing some form of mentorship programs, being involved in that, It's really kind of whatever you and the prosecutor can agree to doing to where it could satisfy their needs and what could benefit your client the most. There's also diversion programs and treatment programs. I believe that's going to be discussed in another segment, a little bit more in depth of what each mean and how you can go about screening your client for those programs. However, it is something to keep in mind when you have a possession case or a felony case. Is your client somebody who could benefit from that? Do they qualify for that? And is that something that they would be willing to do? Bench probation versus state probation. Oftentimes, the initial recommendation from the state is that they plead guilty to probation to the state, which means they'll have a probation officer and they'll go through those along with the requirements and conditions of probation. However, that's state probation. Bench probation is essentially just going to probation to the judge, and there's no requirements that the state probation will require. So if you have a client that works full-time or has 2 jobs or has children, that might be something where if they had a probation officer, it might be difficult for them to meet all the requirements, so consider bench probation. Of course, it has to be negotiated with the prosecutor and agreed to by the judge. And alternative courts, again, we talked about the treatment programs, the diversion programs. Alternative courts would also be part of that genre of options. So definitely keep those in mind when you're discussing a potential resolution to your case. Hi, I'm Paulette Pagan, and I have been with the Public Defender's Office for over 2 years now. I've tried 5 jury trials in this office, and I hope that these slides today really help guide you in the next steps to take when you're looking at a criminal case and when you're discussing the case with your clients. I know that we've gone through a lot, and there's several different forms of first client interviews and whatnot, but I really hope that what we provided to you will help, and thank you so much.